We are going to move on now to animating, very basic animating. We're just going to maintain the relationship we've established here with our lovely yellow square. And we're going to go into the timeline and have a look at what sort of controls we have for this yellow square. And these controls are going to be standard for any other layer that you would work with for the most part besides 3D stuff. But anything that you import, a JPEG to a QuickTime movie to a layered Photoshop file, whatever, they're all going to have the same properties that we're about to cover here. I'm just staying simple with this lovely yellow square. In the timeline, I'm going to go down to this little triangle twirly guy and kick it open, and I see that I have a category called transform, and transform has another twirly, and you kick that open, and we now have access to all of the transform attributes that a layer like this could have. Anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. The attributes are completely editable, and they have different values. So anchor point, position are both operating on a coordinate system. Scale is operating on a percentage system, and there are two of them. We'll talk about that in a second. And we have rotation, which operates on a degree, and opacity, which also has a percentage. Anchor point, position, and scale all have two values because we're currently working in a two-dimensional space with this layer. I have X and Y coordinates that I can alter. So the anchor point coordinates currently 100 and 100 are X and Y values. My position currently 433 by 243 is X and Y coordinates as well. Scale being 100% and 100% is X and Y related again. So those three attributes are all based off of a two-dimensional plane system. Rotation has two values, however it has nothing to do with X and Y. It has to do with revolutions versus degrees of rotation. The first value is revolutions, which is like, based off of a full 360 degree revolution. So if you're to type 1 in here, you're not going to see any change in your layer because it's just done at 360. You're only going to see change if you change your actual degrees. And opacity has a scale between 0 and 100%. We'll cover these in detail here in a bit. Anchor point. The anchor point is the reference point for your layer in which position, scale, and rotation are all going to be affected by. And every layer that you bring into After Effects, whether it's one you create through the layer new solid method or through importing JPEG or whatever, the anchor point is always in the center of the layer. So this solid that I created was a 200 by 200 solid. I'll just go into, oh, look, layer solid settings. I forgot to mention this earlier. This is how you can go back and change your solid settings if it is one that you created through After Effects. So here I can come up and I can see that I created this thing at 200 by 200 and it's yellow. So the fact that my anchor point is saying that its x value is 100 and y value is 100 means that this sucker is 200 pixels across and 200 pixels tall, and that the center point of my layer is going to be at a x value of 100, which is basically counting off of the left edge. So it's 100 pixels in and going from top down 100 pixels down, and that's where we're at our center. If I were to change these values, I'm going to change it to 0. Just hit tab. Tab is lovely. 0, 0. I now see that it has affected the physical position, the placement of the square on my composition window. However, the anchor point has not moved. The anchor point has stayed exactly where it was. I have just changed its relationship to the solid that I'm working on. So now I am 0 pixels in from the right and 0 pixels down from the top. I'm in the very top leftmost corner of this square. The position here is the location of that anchor point. So my position still is the same as it was before, 433.4 by 243. And that position is a coordinate of x and y based off of the composition dimensions. So now what we're doing is we're saying, yeah, hey, anchor point, you are located at a position value of 433 pixels from the right and 243 pixels from the top. Boom, dead center in my document. Or, God, why did I say document? It's a composition. In my composition. If I turn on my title safe, there's the center of my comp, and there's the center of, well, that's where the anchor point is located. So anchor point and position totally connected to each other, really, because the position is just saying where you want your anchor point to be. The anchor point's relationship is to the solid. The position has a relationship to the composition. This is huge to get programmed into your head. Seriously, think about it. If you're tripping right now and you don't get it, stop the video, maybe go back and listen to it a few more times and just play with After Effects until you understand what we're talking about here. So now if I went to position and said, hey, 0, 0 for position, now what I've said is not only would I like my anchor point to be on the top left coordinate of my square, but I would like that anchor point to be located at the top leftmost coordinate of my composition. Now, if I was to change my anchor point's value to 200x and 200y, I don't see my square at all. That's because I've said I'd like my anchor point to be located on the very right bottommost edge of my square. So I'm not going to see it unless I zoom out. So here's my square, it's just not on screen. Because I told After Effects that I would like the position of that anchor point to be at 0, 0 on the composition. And that's where that anchor point is, since it's in the very bottom left corner of my solid. If I was to change that anchor point back to what its default was, which was halfway across and halfway down, now I'm only seeing a quarter of my square. Okay, let's put this back in the middle. Geez, what was that value? I don't remember. It'd be really nice if there was a reset button. There is. All right, so I just reset it, and we're back to 436 and 243. I must have changed that earlier because that's not the value I had originally. But anyways, we're in the center. Right back where we started. Reset is going to reset anything that you've changed in these values. All right, so that's anchor point and position. Scale. Scale has a link here, which means if it's linked, anything that you change to your X value of scale is going to affect the Y value. So if I were to drag this down or up, you see that both values change. And what I have is a proportional change in scale uniformly both on the horizontal and vertical axis. If I was to unlink that by just clicking on it and start changing my X value, I'm now changing the scale of its width, or if I do its Y, its height. So this is how you can get variation in things without keeping those proportions constrained. I'm going to click on reset. Boop, bring it back, and I'm going to link those two. 100% on scale is not the end of what you can do with scale. You can go beyond 100% as much as you want. You can only go down, oh, this isn't right. I think we can go beyond, yeah, we can go negative. We just flipped in a negative. Why was I even going to pretend like you couldn't? I've been doing this forever. You can go as far as you want in either direction. What you need to keep in mind is that if you go beyond 100% on anything that is a bitmap or raster-based image, like a photograph or a QuickTime movie, any sort of Photoshop document that you've created, you're going to start to lose the integrity of your image. You're going to get pixels, and it's going to look like junk. So only go beyond 100% if you're doing scale change in like After Effects native elements like a solid or a shape layer or text, or Illustrator files that are all based on vector. You'll learn about this later. So be careful about how you scale things up. If it's a photograph and you're blowing it up past 100%, we're gonna call you on it, and it's gonna look like junk. Rotation. All right. So I said earlier that this is broken into revolutions and degrees. If you just start to drag your degrees in either direction, you'll see that you're giving it a positive rotation or a negative rotation, depending on which way you go. So that is the actual degree change. As soon as you go past 360, it starts over again, but you can see it just put in one revolution, and now I'm at 12 degrees. So I've gone past my 360 degree sort of limit once, and it's keeping track of that. But I've surpassed it by 12 degrees, so there's the 12 degrees. I'll click on reset. Opacity does max out at 100%, but you can go to 0 to 100. So you have a range of opacity from being completely transparent, which is 0%, all the way up to being completely opaque, which is 100%. Okay, all of these attributes here are going to be what you use to make changes to your layers. And it's either going to be a uniform change or a change that happens over time. And that's where we get into the animation stuff. But before we do that, I just want to talk quickly about a few tools. Well, yeah, like basically a few tools. Okay, that are going to do the same thing as getting access to these values here. So the very first one, anchor point. So yeah, you know that you can come down here, open up transform, see anchor point, and then change its values here. But it would be nice if maybe you could do it on screen. So just to remind you, if I changed the value of an anchor point in the timeline, it actually has a direct effect on the physical location of your solid. So I'm just dragging my X value left and right on the anchor point. And you can see that it moves. What am I doing? Get out of there. But there is a tool for this, and the tool is up in the toolbar here, and it's this strange looking dotted line thing with some arrows called the pan behind tool. You know, I was really hoping they were going to come out with CS5 and rename some of these things to make sense. It should be called anchor point tool. That's what it is. So if you grab that anchor point tool, that's what I'm going to call it, the pan behind tool, and come down to your composition window, your cursor now looks a little bit different. It has the pan behind icon next to this little triangle. And that's going to allow me to grab that anchor point physically and move it where I want it. It can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be within the boundaries of your solid. It can be anywhere you want. So as I drag it, notice the coordinates in anchor point are changing, as well as the anchor points, or sorry, the coordinates for position. And my square is not moving. It's staying right where I originally had it. So now if I move my anchor point like over here, I've got a new coordinate for my anchor point and a new coordinate for position. So I'm going to go back to the default tool here, which is my selection tool. And if I were to now change anchor point, let's just deselect those there. Hey there, sticky deal. Now again, it's moving the square, and the anchor point is not moving. It's just moving the square closer to the anchor point. So get used to that too. Seriously, play with this stuff just so you're comfortable with it and seeing the difference between assigning a new value for it in the timeline versus dragging it somewhere in the composition with the tool. Real quickly, I'm going to jump, just since I have the anchor point off of my square, I just want to talk about like rotation. Maybe I should talk about scale first. Scale all happens from your anchor point. So if I were to start scaling down, notice how it's scaling from that anchor point. The same thing will be true with rotation. If I start to rotate this, it's rotating it around the anchor point. So the anchor point also kind of considered your pivot point. And that's how you can get some really nice variation in your animation or placement, whatever, just by messing with your anchor point's location. All right, I'm going to choose reset just to bring that back to where it should be. So position, if you were to just use your selection tool and grab and drag your object, your solid, your layer, whatever it is, around, you'll see that you can put it wherever you want to visually. So some people like to work visually. Some people like the coordinates because it keeps them sort of in a nice confined area. And then half the time you're doing a little bit of both, because you might need to do incremental changes or stay within a horizontal path, so that way you can just change your X value, whatever. So with just the selection tool, if you just grab your solid and move it, you just need to make sure you click inside of it somewhere. Because if you click on a corner handle or a top, bottom, side handle, you're going to be affecting your scale. So these little handles allow me to change the scale of this solid by just clicking and dragging on it. And if I just click and drag without any modifier keystroke, I'm going to break the link, and I can stretch it horizontally or stretch it vertically, and it's not going to keep constrained proportionally until I hold down Shift. So I'm holding down Shift, and you can see that now it's keeping the X scale linked with the Y scale, and I'm getting a nice proportional change that's uniform in both directions. Alright, back to 100%. I'm just going to reset this stuff again. Okay, now there's another tool for rotation, and it is the rotation tool. It's It's up in your toolbar. It has a little circle arrow thing, and if you use this tool and click on your solid, doesn't really matter where you click, just as long as it's selected, you'll be able to rotate this thing, and you can see that as you rotate it, it changes the value in the timeline rotation setting. So there's that. It's really good to get to know your shortcuts. V is your selection tool, W is your rotation, I should know pan behind, Y is pan behind tool. All these tools have different shortcuts for them, by the way. Good to know. Alright, so that's animating part 1. We haven't animated yet. So part 2 will be the animation. The stuff that everyone's dying to do.